My name is Roman Williams, 70 years old now, and still standing tall despite everything. I built a $55 million fortune from absolutely nothing, only to watch my only son Jackson celebrate his inheritance by serving eviction papers on his own father. The smug look on his face as he handed me those documents still haunts me. What he never suspected was the existence of a second will, or what the mysterious key I left behind would unlock. If you are watching this video, let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button too, if you want to hear the full story of how I taught my entitled son the ultimate lesson about family and fortune. I was born in a small Midwestern town called Riverdale, where my father worked at the local factory, and my mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the north side. We never had much, but they taught me the value of hard work and integrity. By 16, I was working 2 jobs after school, saving every penny I could for college. Nobody in my family had ever gone to university, but I was determined to break that cycle. When I finally got accepted to State University on a partial scholarship, I still had to work nights at a gas station and weekends at a warehouse to make ends meet. Sleep was a luxury I rarely enjoyed, but I never complained. Every exhausting day was a step toward a better future. It was in my business management class that I met Elaine Peterson, the smartest person in the room and the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She came from a middle-class family, not rich but comfortable enough that she only had to work part-time at the campus bookstore. What drew me to her was her mind, her drive, and her kindness. When everyone else looked at me and saw just another poor kid trying to climb the ladder, Elaine saw potential. We started studying together, then dating, and by our senior year, we were already planning our future. Not just marriage, but a business partnership too. Elaine had a brilliant mind for systems and operations, while I had a knack for sales and relationships. Together, we believed we could build something special. After graduation and a small wedding that we paid for ourselves, we pooled our meager savings and took the biggest risk of our lives. We opened Williams Property Management, a tiny office with just the 2 of us, managing rental properties for absentee landlords. The first year was brutal. We worked 14-hour days, 7 days a week. There were moments when we could barely afford to pay rent on our own apartment, let alone the office space. 6 years into our marriage, just as the business was finally gaining traction, we welcomed our son, Jackson, into the world. I still remember holding him in the hospital, this tiny human that Elaine and I had created, and promising him that I would give him everything I never had growing up. Maybe that was my first mistake. While I was out securing new clients and properties, Elaine was the true hero. She would have Jackson in a bassinet beside her desk, feeding him between phone calls, changing diapers while reviewing contracts. She never complained, never asked for special treatment. Her dedication to both our son and our business was awe-inspiring. As Jackson grew, so did our company. By his 10th birthday, Williams Property Management had evolved into Williams Real Estate Holdings. We were no longer just managing properties, but buying them. First, small residential units, then commercial spaces, and eventually entire development projects. Every win, every acquisition was a family celebration. Jackson grew up understanding that our success came from sacrifice, teamwork, and integrity. At least, that was what we thought we were teaching him. When Jackson was 23 and just finishing his MBA from an elite university we paid for, Elaine was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months. She lasted 4. Those final months were the darkest of my life. Watching this vibrant, brilliant woman, who had been my partner, in everything waste away before my eyes. Jackson seemed devastated too, but looking back, I see the differences in how we processed grief. I threw myself into preserving Elaine's legacy through the business we built together. Jackson threw himself into the lifestyle that our success could now afford. While I was honoring his mother by maintaining our company values, he was buying sports cars and taking lavish vacations with friends. I tried to understand. Grief takes different forms, especially in the young. I told myself he was just trying to distract himself from the pain of losing his mother. I made excuses for his behavior, his increasing distance, his dismissive attitude toward the business principles that Elaine and I had established. In the years following Elaine's death, I attempted to maintain our family bonds. Sunday dinners, fishing trips, bringing Jackson into more significant roles in the company. But something fundamental had shifted. The boy who once sat wide-eyed listening to stories of our early struggles now seemed bored by any conversation that was not about expansion, acquisition, or profit margins. What I failed to recognize then was that, while Elaine and I had built a fortune, we had somehow not managed to pass down our values to our only child. The hunger that drove us was not the same hunger that drove Jackson. We had been hungry for security, for respect, for the chance to build something meaningful. Jackson was simply hungry for more. Despite our humble beginnings, Jackson never knew true hardship. By the time he was forming memories, our business was already successful. He attended the best private schools, wore designer clothes, and had every new gadget before his friends. Still, I tried to instill our values. I made him work summer jobs at our properties, starting with maintenance and landscaping. Elaine insisted he understand every aspect of the business from the ground up. But privilege is a powerful force. While his classmates spent summers lounging by pools, Jackson was checking air conditioning units and painting rental properties. He resented it, though he never said so directly. I would catch glimpses of it in his expression when he thought I was not looking, in his rushed work, in his constant checking of his phone to see what his friends were doing without him. When it came time for college, Jackson had his pick of schools. His grades were good, if not stellar, but our donations to several universities ensured he had options. He chose Westmore University, not for its academic programs, but because it was known for its powerful alumni network and social scene. Elaine was concerned, but I overruled her. I wanted him to have the opportunities I never had. At Westmore, Jackson majored in business with a focus on finance. His calls home became less frequent, usually centered around needing more money for one thing or another. The few times I visited campus, I noticed his changing appearance, more polished, more concerned with brands and status. The transformation continued through his 4 years, culminating in his acceptance to Hartwick Business School for his MBA. By graduate school, Jackson had formed a solid social circle, all from wealthy families with established names. Old money. These were connections I once would have valued for their business potential. But something about this group felt different. They were not builders or creators, but maintainers of wealth, experts at preserving and displaying status rather than generating actual value. It was during his second year at Hartwick that Jackson met Sophia Blackwell. She came from a banking family with roots going back to the early 20th century. Beautiful, poised, and completely at ease in high society, Sophia represented everything Jackson now aspired to. I met her at their graduation and felt an immediate disconnect. Her handshake was limp, her smile practiced but empty, her questions about our business perfunctory. But Jackson was clearly enamored, and within a year they were engaged. Their wedding was an extravagant affair at the Blackwell estate, costing more than Elaine and I had spent on our first 3 investment properties combined. I smiled through it all, giving a toast about love and partnership that felt hollow even to my own ears. Jackson and Sophia's marriage was not the partnership Elaine and I had built. It was an alliance, a merging of assets and social status. After the honeymoon, a 3-month tour of exclusive resorts around the world, Jackson finally joined the company full-time. I created a position for him as Vice President of Strategic Development, hoping he would finally connect with the business his mother and I had built. Instead, he treated it as a title rather than a responsibility. Jackson and Sophia purchased a mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, complete with staff and a garage full of luxury vehicles. Their social media accounts became showcases of their lifestyle. Endless posts of charity galas, yacht parties, and private jet travel. None of it seemed to bring them joy, just status. My attempts to involve Jackson in meaningful aspects of the business, were met with disinterest. He would arrive late to meetings with developers, check his phone constantly during negotiations, and propose shortcuts that would maximize short-term profits while damaging our reputation for quality and integrity. Our most heated arguments came over tenant relations. Williams Real Estate had always prided itself on fair practices, reasonable rent increases, and investing in property maintenance. Jackson pushed for aggressive rent hikes in our residential units and minimal investments in upkeep, strategies that would increase profit margins but harm the very people who made our business possible. When I would mention his mother and how these practices violated her principles, Jackson would grow cold. I still hear him saying, "Mom was sentimental about business. That might have worked 20 years ago, but the market is different now. We are leaving money on the table." Leaving money on the table. As if the $55 million company his mother and I built through decades of honest work was somehow insufficient. As Jackson pushed 40, his impatience grew more apparent. In meetings, he would undermine my decisions in subtle ways, suggesting to board members that my approaches were outdated. Behind closed doors, he began using phrases like, "when I take over and after the transition," never asking if I planned to step aside, always assuming it was inevitable and imminent. Seeing the direction things were heading, I began having private meetings with Thomas Harrington, my oldest friend, and the company's chief legal counsel. Together, we discreetly created a contingency plan to protect the company and its employees from Jackson's more predatory instincts. Thomas warned me that my son might not react well to any perceived restrictions on his inheritance. I brushed off his concerns, unable to believe my own son would truly betray me for money. That was my second mistake. My 70th birthday should have been a celebration of life and legacy. Jackson and Sophia organized an elaborate party at the Grand Meridian Hotel, with hundreds of guests including business associates, politicians, and socialites. On the surface, it was impressive, a fitting tribute to a successful businessman. But something felt hollow at its core. During the evening, I stepped out onto the terrace for some fresh air and overheard Jackson speaking with two of his friends from business school, now both working in private equity. "Once Dad gives up control, we are going to streamline everything," Jackson was saying, champagne sloshing in his glass. "There is so much untapped value in the company assets. He is too attached to properties that are underperforming just because they were some of the first he and Mom bought." "When do you think he will step down?" one of his friends asked. Jackson laughed, a sound that sent a chill through me. "He is 70 now. How much longer can he really hold on? Another year, maybe 2. I am already handling most of the important decisions anyway." I slipped away before they noticed me, the words echoing in my mind. That night, I realized that my son was not waiting for me to pass the torch. He was waiting for me to drop it. In the weeks that followed, Jackson began a subtle campaign, suggesting it was time for me to enjoy retirement. He would leave brochures for luxury retirement communities on my desk, forward articles about executives who stepped down to enjoy their golden years, schedule meetings at times he knew conflicted with my regular doctor appointments. When those tactics proved ineffective, Jackson shifted strategies. He began bringing in outside financial advisors and consultants, without my approval, people who would produce reports suggesting our company structure was inefficient, our holdings too diversified, our profit margins too slim compared to competitors who employed more aggressive tactics. Then came the comments about my health, always framed as concern. "Dad, you seem tired today. Maybe you should take the afternoon off. Are you sure you are up for this trip? It is a long flight for someone your age. I noticed you forgot Thompson's name yesterday. Has your doctor checked your memory recently?" I was 70, not senile. I still swam half a mile 3 times a week, had regular checkups that showed excellent health for my age, and could recall details from meetings decades ago that Jackson had already forgotten from last week. But he was planting seeds, not just with me, but with the board, with employees, with business partners. My suspicions were confirmed when I used Jackson's office computer while he was out to lunch with clients. He had left his email open, and there in his drafts folder, was a document titled Williams' Restructuring Plan. It outlined a strategy for breaking up our company into specialized divisions, selling off the affordable housing units that had been Elaine's passion project, and replacing long-term employees with cheaper, less experienced staff. I was still processing this betrayal when, 2 weeks later, I experienced chest pains during a particularly tense board meeting where Jackson was pushing to liquidate a housing development we had promised to keep affordable for teachers and first responders. The pain was severe enough that my assistant called an ambulance. At the hospital, tests revealed it was not a heart attack, but severe stress and elevated blood pressure. During my 3 days in the hospital, Jackson visited only twice, both times bringing company documents for me to sign rather than comfort or support. Maria Gutierrez, our housekeeper of 25 years, spent more time at my bedside than my own son did. She brought homemade soup and reported in hushed tones that Jackson had been bringing people into my home office, going through my files. Upon my release, I immediately contacted Thomas and requested an urgent private meeting away from the office. We met at his fishing cabin by Lake Morrison, where no one would overhear us or report back to Jackson. There, I laid out everything I had discovered and my growing fear that my son was not just eager for his inheritance, but actively working to hasten it. Thomas listened gravely, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I recognized from 30 years of friendship as a sign of deep concern. Roman, I have to be blunt. What you are describing goes beyond normal ambition or even greed. These are the actions of someone who views you as an obstacle, not a father. I have seen this before in family businesses, but never expected it from Jackson. For hours, we discussed options. A straightforward will would not be enough. Jackson would find ways to contest it if it did not give him what he wanted. Instead, we crafted a more sophisticated approach: 2 wills and a secret trust. The first will would appear to give Jackson everything he desired, conditional upon his behavior during a probationary period where I would step back but not fully retire. The second will, to be revealed only if necessary, would activate a trust that would protect the company, its employees, and its mission according to the values Elaine and I had established. The key to a safe deposit box containing this second will and all supporting documentation would be my insurance policy, my leverage, my final card to play if Jackson fully revealed the extent of his betrayal. As I drove home from Thomas's cabin that evening, I felt a profound sadness weighing on my chest. I had spent decades building not just a business, but what I thought was a legacy for my son. Now I was planning defenses against that same son. No father should have to protect himself from his own child. To test Jackson's true intentions, I announced at the next executive meeting that I would be taking a step back from daily operations for 3 months, ostensibly for health reasons following my hospital stay. I would remain as chairman and CEO but delegate day-to-day decisions to our executive team, including Jackson as chief strategy officer. This was not a retirement or even a medical leave, simply a reduction in my hands-on involvement to see how the company would function and how Jackson would behave when given more authority. I expected changes. I did not expect a bloodbath. Within 2 weeks, Jackson had terminated Gerald Foster, our chief operations officer who had been with the company for 22 years, replacing him with Darren Walsh, a former classmate from business school with a reputation for slashing costs at the expense of quality and employee well-being. The dismissal was handled cruelly, with security escorting Gerald out of the building. He had helped design as if he were a criminal rather than a devoted executive who had missed his daughter's college graduation to handle a company crisis. Next came the sale of our affordable housing division, a project especially dear to Elaine, who believed strongly that successful businesses had an obligation to strengthen their communities. These properties were profitable, just not as profitable as luxury developments. Jackson pushed through the sale despite objections from several board members, claiming the company needed to focus on core competencies. The 300 families living in these units now faced uncertain futures under new ownership, known for steep rent increases. When I attempted to discuss these decisions, Jackson was dismissive. "These were necessary business moves, Dad. Gerald was coasting on your friendship, and the affordable units were dragging down our overall portfolio performance." The board agreed with me. What he did not mention was that he had been systematically building alliances on the board, particularly with newer members who had not known Elaine or been part of our company's growth from humble beginnings. He had been wining and dining them, taking them to exclusive golf clubs, arranging box seats at sporting events, all while painting a picture of me as a once great leader now past my prime. The most personal blow came when I arrived at the office one morning to find my belongings being moved to a smaller office down the hall. Jackson had taken my corner office, the one I had occupied for 25 years, the one where I had photos of Elaine and mementos of our journey together. His explanation was that, as the active executive, he needed the space for meetings with important clients. My new office had none of the personal touches, none of the history. It felt like exile within my own company. Maria later told me that many of my personal items never made it to the new office, that Jackson had instructed the movers to discard anything that looked outdated or cluttered. Then came the dinner that opened my eyes to the full extent of Jackson's plans. He and Sophia invited me to their home, ostensibly to discuss company matters. The meal was prepared by their private chef, the wine served by their butler. Throughout the evening, the conversation repeatedly turned to how I should enjoy my retirement years and not worry about the business anymore. "You know, Dad," Jackson said as dessert was served, "this house is really too large for just Sophia and me, especially with our travel schedule. But it would be perfect for you. All that space for your books and memorabilia, the garden you could tend. Meanwhile, there are some wonderful luxury condos downtown, perfect for someone looking to simplify. No maintenance, excellent security, close to restaurants and cultural events." I nearly choked on my coffee. He was suggesting I move out of my own home, the one I had shared with Elaine, where we had raised him, where every corner held memories of our life together. And for what? So he and Sophia could move in? Take over not just my company, but my home as well? I mumbled something non-committal and excused myself early, claiming fatigue. On my way out, I glanced at Jackson's desk in his home office and saw brochures for several upscale senior living communities. Not just condos, but assisted living facilities. My son, who had barely visited me during a 3-day hospital stay, was planning my life in a retirement home. The following week, I discovered that Jackson had been holding separate meetings with our board members, executives, and key clients, meetings to which I was not invited. My loyal assistant, Pamela, who had been with me for 15 years, quietly informed me of these secret gatherings. She had overheard enough to know that Jackson was suggesting to everyone that I was experiencing cognitive decline, that my occasional forgetfulness of names was a sign of serious mental deterioration. The culmination of these betrayals came during a quarterly board meeting. I arrived early, as was my custom, only to find the meeting already in progress. Jackson was at the head of the table, my seat, presenting a document titled Succession Planning and Leadership Transition. As you can all see from the examples I have provided, he was saying, "My father is unfortunately no longer fully competent to lead this organization. I say this with great sadness and respect, but we have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders and clients." The room fell silent as they noticed me standing in the doorway. Some had the decency to look ashamed. Others, particularly the newer board members, simply looked uncomfortable at the awkward timing. Jackson recovered quickly. "Dad, we were just discussing some future planning. Nothing urgent. Why not take the day off? You seem tired." I walked calmly to the table, took the presentation from his hands, and skimmed the contents. It was worse than I had imagined. Jackson had compiled a list of minor memory lapses, moments of fatigue, and perfectly normal signs of aging, presenting them as evidence of serious mental decline. He had even included statements from a neurologist who had never examined me, offering generalized comments about the progression of dementia in men my age. Looking around the table at these people, many of whom I had mentored, hired, or helped through personal crises, I felt a profound sense of betrayal. But beneath that was something more valuable: clarity. I now understood exactly what my son was capable of. That evening, I returned home to find Maria in tears. Jackson had called to inform her that her services would no longer be needed once I transitioned to retirement living. She had been with our family for 25 years, had helped raise Jackson, had cared for Elaine during her final months, and he was discarding her as casually as he would replace an outdated appliance. That night, I asked Thomas to accelerate our contingency plans. The trap was set, but I needed to appear vulnerable, defeated. I needed Jackson to believe he had won in order to reveal the full extent of his betrayal. Only then would the second will and the true ownership structure of Williams' real estate holdings come into play. My heart broke as I prepared to implement the plan, but Jackson had left me no choice. The son I had raised was gone, replaced by someone who viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle between himself and $55 million. Over the next month, I adopted a strategy of apparent surrender. In meetings, I became quieter, deferring to Jackson more often. I began arriving at the office later, leaving earlier. I allowed a slight stoop to enter my posture, an occasional tremble in my hand when signing documents. The performance was subtle but effective. I could see the satisfaction in Jackson's eyes, the belief that I was finally accepting the inevitable. His boldness grew in proportion to my apparent decline. He began making major decisions without even the pretense of consulting me, redirecting company resources to projects that prioritized flash over substance. Our long-standing commitment to quality construction was sacrificed for cheaper materials that would boost short-term profits but create long-term maintenance issues. Employee benefits were cut. Client relationships that I had nurtured for decades were damaged by Jackson's arrogant approach. Throughout this difficult period, I maintained close contact with Thomas, documenting every questionable decision, every instance of Jackson undermining company values or mistreating staff. Each transgression strengthened the case for activating the second will and trust if necessary. But I still held out hope that my son might show some redeeming qualities, some indication that he had not completely abandoned the values his mother and I had tried to instill. That hope died the day of the will reading. I had instructed Thomas to conduct a private reading of my current will, explaining to Jackson that given my age and recent health concerns, I wanted him to understand exactly what his responsibilities would be when the time came. This was presented as a courtesy, a father ensuring his son was prepared for the burden of inheritance. The will, of course, was the first one we had created, the decoy that would reveal Jackson's true character. It was legally valid, but designed to be superseded by the second will under specific circumstances. Jackson arrived at Thomas's office with barely concealed excitement, bringing Sophia along presumably to share in the momentous occasion. Throughout the reading, as Thomas detailed the $55 million estate, the full ownership of Williams' real estate holdings, the various properties and investments that would pass to Jackson, I watched my son's face. There was not a trace of sadness at the discussion of my eventual death, only a gleam of anticipation, of plans already forming. When Thomas finished reading, Jackson turned to me with what I suppose he thought was an expression of gratitude. "Thank you, Dad. I promise to honor your legacy." The words were right, but the eyes were wrong. In them, I saw only calculation. That evening, Jackson and Sophia hosted what they called a celebration dinner at their home, inviting several board members and executives. The pretense was to celebrate the company's record quarterly profits, but the timing made the true purpose clear. This was a coronation before the king was dead, a premature victory lap. I attended briefly, maintaining my role as the fading patriarch. Throughout the evening, I overheard snippets of Jackson's conversations, his plans to modernize, streamline, and aggressively expand the company once he was officially in control. Not once did he mention the employees who would lose jobs in this vision, the tenants who would face displacement, or the community programs that would lose funding. I excused myself early, citing fatigue. No one, least of all Jackson, tried to convince me to stay. The next morning, just as I was finishing breakfast, Jackson arrived at my home unannounced. He was dressed in one of his expensive suits, a leather portfolio under his arm. No warmth in his greeting, no pretense of a social visit. "I have something for you to sign," he said, taking a seat at my kitchen table without being invited. From the portfolio, he removed a document and slid it across to me. "Now that everything is settled with the will and succession plan, we should formalize the living arrangements as well." I glanced at the papers. Eviction notice. My son was formally evicting me from my own home, the home where I had lived with Elaine for 30 years, where we had raised him. "The company is purchasing this property as part of our downtown development expansion," he explained in a clinical tone. "As a courtesy, you have 30 days to relocate. I have taken the liberty of reserving you a unit at Lakeside Retirement Village. Very exclusive, excellent care facilities for when you need them." I read through the document slowly, allowing my hands to shake slightly, playing the part of the devastated father. "This is our family home, Jackson. Your mother and I built this place when you were just a boy. All her gardens, her design choices, our memories together." Jackson's expression did not change. "It is just a house, Dad. An inefficient use of prime real estate, honestly. The retirement community is much more suitable for someone your age. Besides, all that matters are the memories you take with you, right?" He tapped the papers. 30 days. I will have my assistant help you with the arrangements." As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. "Oh, and I have already spoken with the board about making my interim leadership position permanent. Just a formality at this point. No need for you to attend the vote." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, looking around at the home Elaine and I had created together. Despite knowing this moment would come, despite planning for it, the pain was still raw. My son had just evicted me from my own home, without a shred of remorse. Whatever doubts I still harbored about implementing our contingency plan vanished in that moment. Over the next week, I began packing my personal belongings, carefully selecting items of true sentimental value. Family photographs, Elaine's journals, the small treasures that held memories no one else would value. Jackson stopped by twice during this time, each visit more impatient than the last, questioning why I was keeping so much junk and suggesting I should start fresh at the retirement community. When he saw me carefully wrapping Elaine's collection of hand-painted teacups, he scoffed. "Those old things? What are you going to do with those at Lakeside? They have their own dining service." I said nothing, continuing my careful packing while taking note of his callousness. This was not just about business anymore. This was a son erasing every trace of his parents from his life, eager to build his empire on the ashes of our legacy. The night before I was to leave, I prepared the key to the safe deposit box containing the second will, trust documents, and evidence of Jackson's actions over the past months. I attached a simple note. "Before you dismantle everything your mother and I built, you should know the full story. This key will show you." On my final morning in the home Elaine and I had shared, I took one last walk through each room, saying a private goodbye. I knew I might never see these spaces again, these walls that had witnessed our joys and sorrows, our triumphs and struggles. In our bedroom, I paused by the window that overlooked Elaine's rose garden, now neglected since Jackson had dismissed the gardener who had tended it for years. As I was placing the last of my boxes in my car, Jackson arrived, ostensibly to help but really to ensure I was actually leaving. He made a show of carrying one light box to his car, mentioning that he and Sophia would be moving in by the end of the week, after some necessary renovations to update the dated decor. Elaine's carefully chosen furnishings and design elements, all to be discarded. At the door, I paused and turned to him. With deliberate calm, I placed the key and note on the entryway table. "This is for you," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "When you are ready to understand what this is really all about." Jackson picked up the key, glanced at the note with a dismissive expression. "Another safety deposit box? More sentimental keepsakes?" He pocketed the key carelessly. "I will look at it when I have time." I said nothing more, walking to my car with dignity despite the pain crushing my chest. As I drove away from the home where I had expected to live out my final years, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Jackson was already on his phone, probably calling his contractor to begin demolishing Elaine's carefully crafted interiors. The battle for the soul of Williams Real Estate Holdings had begun, and my son had no idea he had already lost. I had arranged temporary accommodations in a modest apartment across town, far from the luxury retirement community where Jackson believed I would be residing. For the first time in decades, I was living simply, anonymously. There was something strangely freeing about it, a return to the basics that had grounded Elaine and me in our early years together. 3 days passed, with no word from Jackson. I knew he had not yet visited the safe deposit box, too busy planning his takeover celebration. Thomas kept me informed of developments at the company, none of them surprising. Jackson had already replaced my portrait in the lobby with a larger one of himself, moved the remaining loyal executives to smaller offices, and scheduled a press release announcing his new role as CEO and chairman. On the 4th day, my phone rang. Jackson's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately. Again, I did not answer. Then, text messages began arriving, first demanding, then increasingly desperate. What is this second will? Call me immediately. Dad, we need to talk about these documents. This is not funny. You cannot do this. The board already approved my position. The first will is legally binding. I turned off my phone. Jackson knew where I was staying, if a face-to-face conversation was what he truly wanted. Instead, an hour later, Thomas called on his office line to inform me that Jackson had stormed into his law office, waving the trust documents and threatening legal action. He is in full panic mode, Roman, Thomas said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. When I confirmed that yes, the second will and trust are completely legal and binding, and that the company shares are actually held by the trust with very specific conditions for succession, I thought he might have a stroke right there in my office. According to Thomas, Jackson had been too busy with his victory lap to read the note or check the safe deposit box until that morning. When he finally did, he discovered the truth. Williams Real Estate Holdings was not directly owned by me, but by a family trust established years earlier. The trust had specific provisions for succession, chief among them that any heir must demonstrate commitment to the company values established by the founders, specifically ethical business practices, employee welfare, and community investment. The documents contained detailed evidence of Jackson's actions over the past months, clear violations of these principles. Additionally, the second will revoked the first entirely, with new provisions for company leadership that explicitly excluded Jackson from any controlling position until he had demonstrated significant personal and professional growth. What happens now? I asked Thomas, feeling no joy in this painful necessity. I have called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. As trustee, I will present the full documentation and evidence. Based on my conversations with several board members already, including those Jackson thought were firmly in his camp, I believe the vote will be decisive. Thomas paused. He will not take this well, Roman. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 the next morning. At 8:30, I received a call from Maria. Jackson had arrived at my apartment building, clearly intoxicated, demanding to speak with me. Security had refused him entry, and he was creating a scene in the lobby. I considered going down to speak with him, but decided against it. This confrontation needed to happen in the formal setting of the boardroom, with witnesses and clear boundaries. I texted Maria back, asking her to tell the security team to escort Jackson off the premises if he would not leave voluntarily. At exactly 9, I entered the Williams Real Estate Holdings boardroom for the first time in weeks. The atmosphere was tense, executives and board members speaking in hushed tones that fell silent as I took my seat at the head of the table. Thomas sat to my right, a thick folder of documents before him. Jackson arrived 12 minutes late, disheveled and radiating fury. His eyes locked on mine across the room, a combination of rage, disbelief, and something I had never seen from him before: fear. "This meeting is a farce," he announced, remaining standing. "My father is clearly mentally incompetent, creating false documents out of confusion and paranoia. I have already contacted my attorneys." Thomas cleared his throat. "Before you continue making accusations, Mr. Williams, I should inform you that we have documentation from 3 separate medical professionals certifying your father's complete mental competence. These evaluations were conducted discreetly over the past 2 months, specifically in anticipation of such claims." For the next hour, Thomas methodically presented evidence of Jackson's actions: the unauthorized firing of long-term employees, the secret board meetings, the plans to dismantle company commitments to affordable housing and community investment, the documented attempts to have me declared incompetent, and finally, the eviction notice served on his own father. Board members who had been swayed by Jackson's charm over expensive dinners now looked at him with clear disapproval. Anthony Bennett, whom Jackson had believed was firmly in his camp, spoke first after the presentation concluded. "I have been on this board for 12 years, Anthony said, his voice grave. "In that time, I have always known Williams Real Estate to operate with integrity, balancing profit with purpose. The actions described today represent a fundamental betrayal of those principles." One by one, other board members spoke, expressing similar sentiments. Jackson attempted to interrupt several times, his arguments growing increasingly desperate and incoherent. When the vote was finally called, it was unanimous. I would be reinstated as CEO and chairman. Jackson would be removed from all operational roles pending a comprehensive review of his conduct. As security arrived to escort Jackson from the building, his face contorted with rage. "You planned this all along," he spat at me. "You set me up to fail. This is my company. Mine." "No, Jackson," I replied calmly. "It was never yours. It was always ours. A shared legacy built on values you chose to abandon. The moment you decided to evict me from our family home was the moment you proved yourself unworthy of that legacy." As he was led away, shouting threats of lawsuits and retribution, I felt no satisfaction, only profound sadness. This was my son, my only child, now a stranger consumed by greed and entitlement. How had we come to this? The aftermath was swift and painful. Thomas arranged for the freezing of company assets that Jackson had begun transferring to his personal accounts. The board approved a forensic audit of all decisions made during his brief period of authority. Several of his more egregious actions, including the sale of the affordable housing division, were found to have procedural flaws that allowed them to be reversed. Within days, news of the dramatic boardroom confrontation had spread through our industry. Jackson and Sophia suddenly found their social invitations drying up, their carefully cultivated network of elite connections unwilling to associate with such public failure. The very people who had eagerly accepted their hospitality now claimed they had always had concerns about Jackson's character. I took no pleasure in my son's fall from grace. Each night in my small apartment, I looked at photographs of him as a child, trying to understand where we had gone wrong. How the sweet boy who once followed me around construction sites, asking endless questions, had become the man who coldly evicted me from my own home. Jackson made several attempts to contact me in the weeks that followed, alternating between threats and desperate pleas. I maintained my distance, instructing Thomas to handle all communication. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too profound for me to trust any apparent change of heart. Meanwhile, I threw myself back into the company, working to repair the damage Jackson had caused. Gerald Foster was reinstated as COO with apologies and compensation for his unjust termination. Negotiations began to reacquire the affordable housing properties. Most importantly, I established more robust governance structures to ensure that Williams Real Estate Holdings would remain true to its founding principles long after I was gone. Throughout this period of reconstruction, I lived simply in my small apartment, finding unexpected peace in the absence of excess. Each night before sleep, I spoke to Elaine's photograph on my nightstand, sharing the day's events, asking for guidance I knew would never come, except through my own conscience and memories of her wisdom. The key that had unlocked the truth for Jackson had also, unexpectedly, unlocked a new chapter for me, one defined not by wealth or power, but by purpose and principle. For 3 months, I maintained my distance from Jackson, focusing instead on rebuilding what he had nearly destroyed. The modest apartment that had initially felt like exile gradually became a sanctuary, a place uncluttered by excess, where I could reflect on the true meaning of success and legacy. During this period of solitude, I reconnected with old friends who had known Elaine and me before our wealth, people who remembered us when our greatest luxury was having enough left over each month to go out for dinner once. These friends reminded me of who we had been at our core, the values that had guided us long before we had millions to manage. Howard Peterson, my college roommate who had gone on to teach economics at a community college, visited often, bringing home cooked meals and decades of wisdom. The problem with creating great wealth, he observed one evening, is that it solves so many problems that the next generation never develops the muscle of struggle. They never learn that happiness comes from overcoming, not from having. His words stayed with me as I contemplated my next steps with Jackson. The easy path would be permanent estrangement, protecting myself and the company from further harm. But that solution addressed only the symptoms, not the disease that had corrupted my son's character. After much reflection and several long conversations with Thomas, I decided on a different approach. Jackson would not be permanently cut off, but neither would he be welcomed back without earning his way through demonstrated change. I would offer him a path to redemption, difficult but not impossible. I arranged our first meeting at a small cafe far from our usual haunts, neutral territory where neither of us would have home field advantage. Jackson arrived looking significantly different than the polished executive I had last seen being escorted from our boardroom. His designer suit was replaced by casual clothes, his normally perfect hair slightly disheveled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Sophia has filed for divorce. She is taking half of everything I have left." I nodded but offered no sympathy. This consequence, at least, was entirely of his own making. "I have a proposition for you," I said after our coffee arrived. "Not a gift, not forgiveness without effort, but a chance to earn back what matters most." The terms were straightforward but demanding. Jackson would be offered an entry-level position in property management, the division where Elaine and I had started decades ago. No title, no corner office, no special treatment. He would work under Gerald Foster, the man he had so callously fired. For 5 years he would learn every aspect of the business from the ground up, just as his mother and I had done. His performance would be evaluated quarterly by a committee that did not include me, based on metrics that emphasized ethics as much as results. "You want me to be a grunt for 5 years?" Jackson asked incredulously. "I have an MBA from Hartwick. I was CEO." "You were never CEO," I corrected calmly. "You attempted a hostile takeover of a family company and failed. Now you can either accept these terms or pursue your own path entirely separate from Williams Real Estate. Those are your only options." Jackson stormed out of the cafe, predictably. 2 weeks later, after what I imagine was a humbling reality check about his prospects elsewhere, given his now tarnished reputation, he called to accept my terms. While Jackson began his long journey back from disgrace, I embarked on a different kind of project. Using personal funds rather than company resources, I purchased a neglected community center in the neighborhood where Elaine had grown up, renovating it into a multi-purpose facility with childcare services, job training programs, and affordable health services. The Elaine Williams Community Center became my passion, a living tribute to her belief that true success includes lifting others along the way. 6 months into his entry-level position, Jackson requested another meeting. This time, we met at the community center, where I was helping to organize a job fair for local residents. He arrived on time, dressed appropriately for the environment, and without the entitlement that had previously defined him. "This is my first time here," he said, looking around at the bustling activity. "Mom would have loved this place." Yes, I agreed. She would have. We walked through the center together, me introducing him to staff and participants, many of whom had no idea he was my son, seeing only another volunteer in casual clothes. For 2 hours, he helped set up tables, distributed information packets, and even assisted an elderly woman with filling out a job application. I watched from a distance, looking for signs that this was merely a performance. Instead, I saw glimpses of the boy he had been, before wealth and ambition corrupted him. Later, over simple sandwiches in my office at the center, Jackson spoke with uncharacteristic humility. "I do not know what happened to me," he said quietly. "Somewhere along the way, I started believing that money was the only measure of success, that the company existed to serve me, not the other way around. I forgot everything you and Mom taught me." "Forgetting is human," I replied, refusing to remember even when reminded. "That is a choice." "I made the wrong choice," he admitted. "Many wrong choices. Evicting you from your home, our home." His voice broke. "I do not expect you to forgive that. I just want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was, and I am truly sorry." I did not offer immediate forgiveness or emotional absolution. Real healing would require more than one conversation, more than a single apology. But it was a start, a small crack in the wall between us that might someday allow for rebuilding. Over the next year, Jackson continued his work at the entry level, gradually earning respect, not through his name, but through consistent effort and growing humility. Reports from his supervisors indicated genuine improvement, not just in performance metrics but in interpersonal relationships and ethical decision-making. During this time, I gradually restructured the company to create more distributed leadership, ensuring that no single person, including myself, could wield unchecked authority. The board was expanded to include employee representatives and community members, creating a more balanced approach to governance that would survive long after I was gone. I also established the Williams Family Foundation, transferring a significant portion of my personal wealth to fund community development projects, educational scholarships, and affordable housing initiatives. This foundation would operate independently of the company, with a diverse board including several people who had benefited from our affordable housing programs over the years. 2 years into Jackson's probationary period, I invited him to Sunday dinner at my apartment, the first such invitation since our estrangement. The conversation was sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but ultimately productive. We discussed business, community, and eventually, tentatively, family, not as CEO and failed usurper, but as father and son finding our way back to some new version of relationship. "I sold the mansion," he mentioned, as the evening was winding down. "It was too big, too empty after Sophia left, too much of a reminder of who I was trying to be." "Where are you living now?" I asked. "A small condo downtown. 1 bedroom. It is all I need, really. I am trying to figure out what actually matters, not what looks impressive." As he prepared to leave, Jackson paused at the door. "The company is actually better now, with the changes you have made. More sustainable, more meaningful." He hesitated. "You were right all along. About everything." I shook my head. "Not everything. I failed too, Jackson. I gave you wealth without ensuring you understood its purpose. I showed you how to build a fortune, but not how to build a life of meaning. That was my greatest mistake." Over the following years, our relationship slowly healed, not into what it had been, but into something new, perhaps more honest. Jackson completed his 5-year program, earning a legitimate position in the company based on merit rather than birthright. He would never be CEO, that had been decided, but he found his own niche in community development projects, applying his business education to maximizing social impact rather than just profit. As for me, I found unexpected fulfillment in my simpler life and focused purpose. The wealth that had once seemed the measure of my success now served as a tool for creating opportunity for others. The company continued to thrive, not despite our stronger ethical commitments, but because of them, attracting employees, partners, and clients who shared our values. The greatest lesson of this painful journey was one Elaine had tried to teach us both long ago. The true measure of wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you contribute. Real inheritance is not money or property, but values and purpose. And family, when it works as it should, is not a power structure but a support system, each member helping the others become their best selves. I often think about that key I left on the table that day, the one that unlocked not just legal documents but a painful, necessary transformation for us all. Sometimes the hardest gifts to give are the ones that cause pain before they can heal. What would you do if faced with a similar betrayal from someone you love? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt in the moment, but led to growth in the long run? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, the greatest inheritance we can leave is not our fortune, but our values.